Okay, good morning. Time now, a few minutes past 8 a.m. On the Friday, December 8th, 2023 in Japan Standard Time. Welcome to another edition of the World Bank Tokyo Online Morning Seminar. My name is Koichi Omori. I am Senior External Affairs Officer of the World Bank based in Tokyo. We organize these online morning seminars to introduce the latest World Bank Group publications presented by the authors of the report for a Japanese audience in a virtual manner. This morning, we have a pleasure of featuring a new report titled Developing Entrepreneurial Ecosystems for Digital Businesses and Beyond, a Diagnostic Toolkit. And we have two co-authors of these publications connecting us from Washington. Let me quickly introduce each one of them. First, we have Marcio Cruz, who is a principal economist in the Economic Research Unit of the International Finance Corporation, IFC. Marcio, good morning, good evening to you. Thanks for joining. Can you hear me?
Hello, Koshi. Good morning for you. Good evening on our side. It's a pleasure to participate. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. And also, we have Juni Zhu, who is the senior economist in the Market Competitiveness and Technologies Global Unit of the World Bank. Juni, good morning, good evening to you. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. As you noticed, this is interesting joint publications by the World Bank and IFC expert. So the next 35-40 minutes, we'll listen to both Marcio and Juni presenting the main point of these new publications. And then after their presentations, as usual, read the questions that we received in advance. If you did not have opportunities to send your questions in advance, please send your question by online form posted on the announcement page of the seminar, or you can send your question directly to me by email, or simply post your question on the chat section of the YouTube screen. In any case, I'll read your question on your behalf, asking the speakers to respond. So with that, I would like to formally invite the Marcio and Juni to come in to kick off the presentation. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Koshi. Perhaps I'll start, Juni, and then I pass the word to my colleague. Koshi, just to double check, can you see the slides? Just to,
yep. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So first of all, again, thank you very much. It's a pleasure for us to have the opportunity to be sharing this work. This work, basically, June and I, we led a very large team. So basically, we are translating and repassing information here, but that involves a huge amount of work of several colleagues across the World Bank Group in several regions, not only developing this toolkit, but I think the most important, the most interesting part, Koshi, of this toolkit is the fact that basically it reflects a lot of pilots that were implemented in several countries in the world, mostly developing and emerging markets. And what we do in this toolkit is basically to provide a very clear guidance with practical examples, suggestions of data on how you basically could implement a diagnostic to try to understand how to enhance the entrepreneurial ecosystems in developing countries. No? So to start with, when we start this project, the first task that we try to do was to try to bring a bit of more rigor to the analysis, trying to define more clearly what an entrepreneurial ecosystem entails, what exactly we're talking about. And basically, we found that there was a gap in the literature on trying to connect this further, particularly with economic theory, with a lot of knowledge that have been accumulated over time in terms of firm level data, so far, so on. And basically, we put together a paper that tries to present this in a more formal way on what are the factors that are relevant to enhance the entrance of new firms, the performance of these firms, and so far and so on. And we did that basically thinking through two stages. The first stage is to think this in a very broader way, like that means like any firm, like the idea that an entrepreneurial ecosystem can enhance the the creation of firms regarding the sector they are. But the main idea is that its conceptual framework is also applied towards business that focus on digital, like digital business and tech firms. That's the topic that Junie will cover afterwards. Okay, so basically, the main idea of the conceptual framework is that first, we're thinking from the perspective of entrepreneurship output. What are the key factors, or what are the key variables that we usually should measure in order to understand if this entrepreneurial ecosystem is performing well or not? And then basically, we have issues related to the entry of new firms, scale up, and innovation. And particularly this part of scale up and innovation, these are very critical part to ensure that in emerging developing countries, firms that are in early stage identify further opportunity to generate better quality jobs, right? Then we go into the what we call entrepreneurial ecosystem pillars. And here we try to understand factors that are related to the demand and supply of factors that are available in this economy. And that involves, for example, the issue of resource endowments related to like infrastructure, physical capital, human capital, knowledge. On the demand side, what are the factors that these entrepreneurs are demanding, and what are the characteristics of these entrepreneurs, the firms that already existed, and also the factors that in many cases makes very harder for like a new entrepreneur that come up with idea have access to resources such as access to finance, regulations, and culture. And then along these factors here, we try to understand how what we call enablers, that means that public programs and intermediate organizations affect all these factors and consequently can impact the entrepreneurship output in these countries. And with that, we propose a conceptual framework that has three stages. In the first stage, what we try to do is to provide a context analysis that is done at the country level or subnational level, for example, all the way to the city level. We do have actually a good example of a diagnostic conducted by some of our colleagues that focus in Tokyo, for example, in the case of Japan, and in other cities in developing countries. But the main idea here is to get a kind of a sense of what are the resources that are available and what's going on in terms of outputs. Then in the second stage, what to do is to map what are the programs, what are the agents that are supporting entrepreneurship, and what are the resources that are available in order to understand if countries or regions within countries are optimizing this resource. And finally, with all this piece of information, we try to provide some guidance in terms of policy. So basically, these are the three key stages that we have on this analysis. Usually, these stages, when we're conducting this kind of diagnostics, can be done individually, separated, but there are significant guides on having these three stages together. And something that is very important to emphasize regarding this toolkit, which is, by the way, is publicly available, so anyone can go and download, is that for each of these stages, we also provide instruments and examples of data that people can use when they are implementing this kind of diagnostics. So basically, the toolkit is organized in 6 modules. Module 1 and 2 focus on the country context or local ecosystem context when you go to subnational level. Module 4 focus on the mapping exercise of try to understand like what are the public programs, intermediary organizations such as incubators, accelerators, so far and so on, providing support. And module 6 focus on policy recommendations. And then we have 2 modules that are module 3 and module 5 that specifically focus on digital businesses. In the case of module 3, focus on try to understand, for example, the dynamic of tech startups, and for this, there is a very rich data set that Junie and some of our colleagues put together to try to understand digital business across the world. We provide some guidance on how this can be used, but we also have some survey instruments such as a startup survey that we have implemented in a few countries, and this questionnaire is available. And here are some examples. So we have implemented pilots in more than 10 countries. And in this toolkit, we provide the reference and all this material are publicly available. That means that when you are conducting this kind of diagnostic in a particular country, you can see examples on how that was implemented. So just to give an example, right, like on the type of a question and the type of information that we try to understand on the context analysis, right? Like so just to remember, in terms of the conceptual framework, we're trying to understand the dynamics firms in terms of the entry of new firms, if these firms are growing, if these firms are innovating, so far and so on. So here is an example that from the pilot that we run in Romania, in which one of the key findings in the country diagnostic for the context analysis was that Romania, in terms of entry, in terms of new firms entering the market, we do observe that Romania is doing quite well, actually, for the level of income of Romania. If you observe in the chart, the left-hand side, for the level of income of Romania, we do have a relatively large number of new firms with respect to their total population. However, when we try to understand the performance of these firms, then we do observe that, for example, among the share of firms that are reaching what we call high growth standards, which usually these are firms that are able to grow, for example, more than 20% consecutively over time. We do see that there's a big gap there. So then one important policy recommendation that we have from this diagnostic is that we should pay attention in the case of that country on how to make sure that these new firms that are entering the market will find opportunity to grow. So that was the key gap. And then for doing that, what we do is basically to go over the factors that we discussed before, like a condition in terms of human capital, access to finance, so far and so on, to try to understand what are the key areas that the government could carry new policies in order to improve these results. So then the second module, as I mentioned, we basically what we try to do is to provide guidance on how you can conduct a similar exercise in terms of context of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. But instead of doing it at the country level, you do it at the subnational level. And then here I'm providing an example that we implemented in Senegal. And then in the case of Senegal, one important question for us was to understand when you focus, for example, in agribusiness, that's a very important sector for Senegal, is to try to understand where are the subnational locations that do have higher potential of an innovative entrepreneurial ecosystems. And basically what we have done with this work was to develop a new method that basically try to take advantage of existing data that we do observe in many cases are available in developing countries. In this case, for example, for Senegal, we use the establishment census data that was provided by the National Statistical Agency to try to understand where there were the agglomeration of firms in terms of quantity and quality in local agribusiness, and basically replicate this for other sectors. For example, for digital ecosystems. For example, here you can see a very interesting contrast in which for local agribusiness, you see a much more diversification, much higher diversification in terms of the quality of the ecosystems and opportunities across the countries compared to digital ecosystem. And that makes sense because basically, when you think about tech startups firms, they tend to be very concentrated around. You have a higher supply, larger supply of human capital, and they tend to be along the largest cities. And here you see that in the case of Dakar, is very concentrated. The case of Senegal is very concentrated in Dakar. Why this is a piece of information that's very relevant for policy? It's because, for example, if you're basically trying to target policies to enhance opportunities for local digital ecosystems, for example, in Senegal, this information helps you to identify what are the areas that basically we should target. Instead of having policies that focus that are national-wide policies, you basically could have policies that focus in a much narrow way. And then in the toolkit, what we do is to provide very detailed information on how you can conduct this kind of exercise and replicate also this kind of exercise towards other countries. Then we have the module that focuses on how to map, how to conduct a mapping of policy instruments. And why this is very important, and that's an area that many times, despite the fact that there are a lot of effort outside the World Bank Group on try to map entrepreneurial ecosystems, that's an area that we can benefit significantly from our expertise and collaboration with governments. And why is this so important? Because many times when you conduct this kind of diagnostics and you come up with a policy recommendations, it's very hard to understand what are the policies that are already in place by these countries. And our experience has been that in many cases, the most effective advice is not about creating a new policy. It's rather about reallocating resources from policies that already are in place to try to make them more effective. I give an example, like we have some experience in the past with Colombia, for example, in which we have done this type of maps of what were the public programs supporting entrepreneurship. And basically the main policy recommendation for the government in Colombia in that time was the fact that they have too many small programs. So basically the main recommendation is that they should target at having fewer programs with more resources and try to gain scale. And a similar recommendation was towards Romania, for example. So basically with the diagnosis to show that the main gap is not in the entry of new firms, but on scaling up. And after doing this map in here, we're able to identify that basically there was a big gap in terms of the public programs that were in place, and they should try to reallocate resource towards early stage finance. So in the toolkit, what we do is to provide survey instruments that the practitioners can use to replicate this kind of exercise across different countries, and also very detailed information on how you conduct this kind of exercise. And here is some kind of example, a practical example of the mapping that we have conducted in Kenya on how this information can be used. So basically what we did in Kenya was to map all the resources and the kind of target that these intermediate organizations that have in place both public and non-public supporting entrepreneurs, what they have been targeted on. And basically here on the left-hand side, we have a heat map showing, for example, by sectors, like agriculture, manufacturing, research, or products that are sector agnostic. What are the areas that they have been focusing most? And with that, we basically are able to identify where is the main demand and the main gap that we have in terms of interventions, and what are the current interventions focused on in order to identify opportunities to improve the policy setup. Here on the right-hand side, we also have an interesting chart suggesting that on the vertical axis, you have the information towards what's the share of programs that are providing support on these areas, like managerial training, access to finance, R&D, so forth and so on. And on the horizontal axis, you have the demand from coming from the service, and you do observe that access to finance, for example, is an area that there's a lot of demand and a lot of supply. But there, in some cases, there are a lot of differences and variation between, for example, programs that are provided by a public sector vis-a-vis private sector, and that's an information that's relevant to optimize. And then finally, with all this piece of information, when you conduct this analysis, we basically come up with a policy recommendation that try to be as specific as possible. And again, in the toolkit, what we do is to provide a review of the literature of programs and policies that seems to be more effective towards different circumstances, and how that can inform the diagnostic and the interactions with governments. Now let's pass the word to my colleague Juno, who will be basically focused on how we have been implementing this type of exercise focused on digital entrepreneurship. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Marcio. And I'll pick it up from here to talk a bit more on what we call a tech entrepreneurship. So virtually, this is what is in a lot of the headlines today because of a lot of the big techs now in the newspaper. And a lot of the attention of the world. So digital entrepreneurship, I want to be clarifying that they're not just R&D researchers. They're actually what we call the strivers, that they're more proactive. They want to elbow their way up. And not only in terms of the economic returns, but also in terms of the ideas, the spirit, and the attitude. So most of the entrepreneurship support program in countries around the world, de facto, actually pivot resources to support this group of people because they're usually more tech savvy, they are more educated, they are also well connected. And then so from a development perspective, they are more likely to create impactful businesses and good jobs. Masio. And so now with that, the definition, I think what is interesting next is to see then how does all these digital startups or what we call digital business is doing around the world. And this is a global database that we put together now with almost 1 million digital firms across the world in about 180 countries to really map like where are these firms, how they are performing, whether they are receiving investments. And this is a map that we create a density, like how many number of digital businesses, but we also control for the population and GDP size, where you can see that some of the less known countries like Estonia, Kenya, they actually come out very high in terms of what their domestic market would have predicted. They actually outperform. Here we can see that Japan is a bit more in the pink in the sense that Japan is actually underperforming in terms of what its GDP and population size or market size would have predicted. So it seems the Japanese market is there are still room for tech startups to flourish in this market. The next. So how here then, as you can see that a lot of the digital business are actually concentrated in a lot of the bigger markets, and then a lot of the larger companies are also located in these bigger markets. So why is that? So here's a concept, what we call digital business model. So digital business model, usually it's the platform-based or data-driven business models that really rely on network effects or what we call economies of scale and scope. So this is where we see that winners take most. So if you look at your normal e-commerce or streaming platforms, you realize a few big tech firms are dominating the market. And we're looking at then specifically why this is the case. What's the business model that is predicting it? And then we realize that as we start mapping out their different product lines, we realized scope economies is what explaining why there are certain countries have a lot more bigger firms in the tech industry, because they're able to form what we call this mega cluster in the right-hand side. And in fact, 60% of digital firms in the world provide solutions in more than one product market. Like, for example, if you look at the fintech in mega cluster 4 in this slide, that you realize a lot of fintech firms, they also provide insurance tech or blockchain technology or cryptocurrency. And a lot of this blockchain technology actually serves the gig economy, because a lot of the gig workers, they might not have a financial account. So a lot of these newer fintech or blockchain solutions actually serve these clienteles. And so you see a lot of these fintech firms start branching out to other product lines and to recruit and lock in users. And that's where the scope economies, or what we call the network effect, start taking place. And this is how they create a lot of the platform ecosystems around the world. And in fact, the fintech and e-commerce are the top two platform ecosystems that drive a lot of these scope economies that's at play. And so a lot of the big techs now in the news is actually within these kind of a scope economies or platform ecosystem space, that they can leverage a lot of this intangible capital, the data, the capabilities, the software licenses, to build good quality product, but also accruing a lot of this intangible capital and build a moat around them So that is also very hard for newcomers to challenge their leading market position. So this is why, like within the digital entrepreneurship and the landscape, you realize that it's a lot more concentrated in a few countries and in a few companies as well. So this concentration pattern, though, doesn't mean that the smaller or emerging market have no prospects. As I just pointed out, that countries like Kenya, like Estonia, they actually is very good at creating more digital business than what their GDP or their population size would have predicted. Why this is the case? So we're trying to devise what we call a digital entrepreneurship growth pathway. So here there are three types: the large economies, the small open economies, as well as the small closed economies. And the large economies, it's a lot of the BRICS or the emerging markets, and as well as, given where the World Bank, we focus a lot on developing countries, but you can already foresee that US is definitely one of those larger economies that dominate this, because there are 4 factors on the left that can explain this kind of dominance. One is the market size. Like there is just a group of population and businesses that can consume a lot of the digital solutions, and or what we call a demand for the services that a lot of the startups are developing. And with this kind of market size, it's very helpful for entrepreneurs to test their product, to bring to the market, and try and test it before it scale internationally. And then the second is there is also a very good availability of financing. So what here we see that if a country has a very good VCPE system, or like in general very good risk capital to support the digital and tech startups, then usually it's also a very conducive factor to help countries. The third is a regulatory environment for digital economy. And here is a lot of the digital market regulations that actually encourage the adoption of digital business models, or even government tech solutions, or what we call GovTech, that provide government to citizen services online. And a lot of these more progressive and digital friendly regulatory environment is also a critical enabling factor. And the fourth is what we probably understand a bit of the basic. So we also need, the internet, the electricity, and sometimes the payment gateway, as well as digital skills to make use of a lot of these different digital technologies. And with these 4 factors, usually the large economies have a higher chance to secure a high score in all these 4 factors, and then hone its tech ecosystem. But then we also see type 2, that there are a set of countries like Estonia, Armenia, and Ghana, they're actually performing better than what their population size or market size would have predicted. And then when trying to understand why that is the case. And turns out there are more of the regional gravity of digitalization in their neighboring markets. So what it means is that they usually adopt very bold policies on tech experimentation. And then they also have very open-minded and progressive policies on a lot of these, like what we call cross-border data flows, talent attraction and retention, so that even though they have a small market size, they're still able to compensate it with a lot of the regional flows of talent, capital, and data. So they're able to scale in that way as well, tapping into the regional network. But then there is also the third type, what we call the small closed economy. And they are definitely in a more difficult position to grow their digital entrepreneurial ecosystem. So for these type of economies, we actually first ask them to consider perhaps tapping into the regional hubs and drive digital or tech adoption first, so that you equip the population or the businesses with very good digitalization prospects and some digital skills, but then eventually can build up the culture and capacity of entrepreneurship.
Junie, just to let you know, your video is off, just in case you're okay.
Okay, great. Thank you. So when I was talking about the digital market regulation, then for some countries, then that they would ask, then what does it mean? So what type of digital market regulations are at play here? So at the World Bank, we developed this framework called Adopt, Scale, and Equity. So it really tried to dissect some of the key policy regulations and then that need to be considered in order to foster digital business models to enter the market and to flourish. So at the first stage is what we call adopt. So what this means is a lot of the basic e-transaction or the regulation on gig economy platforms. So virtually you want to let the digital business models to operate in the country. With some certainty. And even if you want to try in a sandbox type of environment, because maybe say certain AI solutions or certain digital solutions that are not very mature yet, so you want to test it out, but at least you should give some certain regulatory certainties to let the market to try it out and test what's the expected effects. So here is what we call a lot of these adopt type of regulations that we usually work with the government to understand where are the bottlenecks. And after a country adopts certain, basic regulation to allow digital business models to enter, then the next stage is we ask, how can you help them scale? And here you can see that a lot of the regulations on personal data protection, cybersecurity, consumer and online supplier or online vendor protection, here is a lot of to enable the trust in order for the businesses or for the consumers to feel that it's safe to adopt digital business models or adopt a digital solutions in their daily life. And here again, then we map and do a heat map of a lot of the policy and regulations in the country and identify certain gaps, including the enforcement side of things. So after we're done with the scale up stage, and then finally we'll also come to a bit of the equity. And that's where for more mature markets, when there are enough big and small firms, enough foreign and local firms, we want to understand a bit of the competition policy as well as the taxation side of things to make sure there is equity, that the smaller firms have a fair chance to challenge the incumbents. And there is equity or contestability in the market to let everybody flourish. So with this framework, we already carry out this kind of diagnosis in more than 10 countries. But again, like a lot of the countries, we find that as you see the heat map, they usually even at the adopt stage, it's already starting underperforming, not even to say the more advanced scale and equity stage. And so that's where we see a lot of the regulations need to be updated to fit with the digital business model. So one of our last slides, it's more about financing, because we do hear a lot from a lot of the tech startups, how can they secure access to finance? So this is a list of key financing instruments that we here at the World Bank Group use to support tech startups. And of course, there are also a lot more in the commercial and public markets. ranging from grants to matching grants to credit lines to subsidized loans, or even some of the equity instruments in terms of fund of funds. And here at the World Bank, at the very minimum, that we are focusing on financing the additionality only. What we mean is that we want to focus more on providing financing to more risky technologies or firms that require more early stage, pre-seed and seed stage of investments, because we know that the private sector investors are not willing to come into this early stage of firms yet, because there isn't a tested model or tested minimal viable product. But once they graduated from this pre-seed and seed stage, we want to make sure that they graduate into more private investor-driven market in terms of credit and equity. So a lot of the intervention then is not about grant hopping, but they actually have a commercial case, and they're actually graduating into some of the Series A to N and eventually to exit. What here we mean is usually in the form of mergers and acquisition or in the form of IPOs. So this is the last, I guess, a bit of the lessons learned, a bit of the experience we see in more than 20 countries in the last decade when we try to help emerging markets to develop their tech startup ecosystem. So a lot of the time that people, when they think about tech startup ecosystem, they always point to Silicon Valley. And we do want to caution that the Silicon Valley model might not be particularly well fitted in many of the emerging markets. This is because in a lot of the emerging markets, we see a lack of deal flows. What we call deal flows is investment-ready startups. So without these deal flows, and then they also have very shallow markets, shallow in terms of the capital market, that there is a much different type of instruments or financing instruments serving the needs of the startups. And they also have small middle class, a very conservative corporate sector that are not necessarily very friendly towards startups or entrepreneurs. And also some of the other weak factors in infrastructure or just hesitance towards digital transformation or digital solutions in general. And so with all these different market dynamics and external factors in mind, that the Silicon Valley model is not exactly that easy to be copied. So we need to keep in mind that this specific model has its unique characteristics. And the second one is also a bit more about the unicorns. We know that many policymakers, when we speak to them, they always say, oh, we don't have any unicorns in our country. Even though our country is, say, a 100 million population, there should be some unicorns. And so like it seems that chasing and nurturing a unicorn is the sole ultimate like objective of nurturing an entrepreneurial ecosystem. But here again, like I think unicorns, it's very rare in most of the emerging markets that we see. And again, it can be because of a shallow market and talent shortages and many of the other challenges, like I said, just a small market size, and then the digital business model tends to be very incumbent. The last lessons I would say is that I see a lot of countries now, especially the public sector, is trying to provide incubation and acceleration services. So to support startup, they train the entrepreneurs, they provide courses, conduct pitching challenges, a lot of these are actually very good services, but we want to make sure that these can be run on a commercial basis, because we also see a big loss of public resources, that a lot of the incubation or acceleration centers are being underutilized because they lack of a quality personnel, lack of good network with the regional seed funders or venture capitalists, and they just in general run in an amateur fashion. And so or they just treat it as a co-working space with internet or free internet. So here that we see that this potentially can be a waste of resources. So here we at the World Bank is trying very hard to restructure some of these facilities to attract more quality personnel and teams, but more importantly, to attract investment-backed incubation or acceleration services to run these programs, because then we know that there is a higher chance that they can graduate into commercial venture. And here that you can see that some of the developing countries can even go into grant hopping type of behaviors, that one startup, they just develop a business plan and then hop from one grant to the other without really being commercialized. So here again, I think a lot of the incubation and acceleration services should have some performance-based indicators and commercialization indicators to that make sure this kind of entrepreneurship service are being run on a commercial approach. So this is what I have here. So somehow my camera is not very collaborating in DC. So like it seems we're in a third world country after all in DC in terms of digital infrastructure. But I'm happy to answer any questions if you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you, for presenting the main point of the report. We received some questions in advance, and also some questions actually came in during your presentation. So let me read some of them first, and asking you to respond comprehensively. First round, those are the questions that we received in advance. Thank you, Sasaki-san, for sending your question as usual. First one. Why does it matter for MDBs, such as the World Bank, to pay attention and conduct a study on the entrepreneurial ecosystems? How does the World Bank support the developing countries through its lending programs? So that's one. The second one, securing necessary infrastructure, particularly electricity, seems the key to promote the digital industries and entrepreneurs, because digital technologies need electricity to function. Does the report discuss the importance of infrastructure provision to grow digital entrepreneurial ecosystems in developing countries? So this is the second question. The third one, what is the most important element, i.e. policy, geography, socio-cultural composition, the existence of educational research institutions, etc., to make a city successfully grow its entrepreneurial ecosystem? If you would advise mayors and governors of subnational entities and local government, what would you advise? So those are the three questions initial rounds. I would like to ask Marcio and Junie to come in to respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps I start to give a break to Junie, who just finished her very interesting presentation. So it starts with why does it matter, and then of course with the head of IFC, I'll say an answer in the name of the World Bank Group in general, and then I'll ask Junie also to emphasize the bank itself. But I do think that something to emphasize is that the portfolio of the World Bank as IBRD and World Bank Group in general, including IFC, has a very large share of programs, in the case of IFC, direct support to firms that cover entrepreneurial behavior, entrepreneurship in general. Like we do actually, this is a super relevant question. We start, I think is one of the first paragraphs of the report emphasize this point that, so basically we have some estimates that in the case of the World Bank, more than $5 billion of the portfolio cover programs that in some way support entrepreneurship. And what that means that these are programs that are taking actions to try to enhance the entry of new firms, they make sure that they scale up and generate more and better jobs. And this is something very important. Like when you're thinking about that, our target is to reduce poverty in a livable planet, we need to make sure that we generate jobs through better firms, through private sector. So I think that would be the key point, is a way to generate a sustainable mechanism for eradicating poverty and boost development in general. No? We emphasize the conceptual framework. We do have a role for infrastructure. We do know that they play a very important role. We actually have an ongoing study with the support of the government of Japan, for which we're extremely thankful, try to understand the opportunities for digitalization of businesses in Africa. And over this study, we're showing that, for example, the arrival of submarine cables in Africa has increased significantly the opportunities in terms of entrepreneurship regarding entry of new firms. These firms grew faster, they start to export, so far and so on. But there is one important point along this story that we show that improving infrastructure is a necessary condition, but is not sufficient. What that means that we show with this evidence for many African countries, for example, that it's true that there are several benefits that comes with digital infrastructure, but there's still a lot of additional benefits that they could achieve if these other complementary factors that we're talking about, such as human capital, access to finance, managerial training, so far and so on, are in place. And what we're trying to do with this toolkit is to get a balanced perspective towards the importance of all these factors together. And that also goes to the last question. What is the most important element at the city level is a very hard question. Apart from other factors, because there are a lot of variation, right? Like so, I think condition on the comparative advantages of cities, we can see that this answer can vary a lot. Now, what we try to do with this toolkit is to provide some instruments in which the major, like what would be the advice for the major, for example, in a particular city, would be to basically to try to understand better what are the particular gap in that condition. And for this, I think our diagnostic can hopefully be helpful and provide some ways to go. Please, Junie.
Great, thank you, Marcio. Yeah, I think what I can complement two things. One is on why does it matter for MDBs to step into it, especially more of the tech side of things. So we have these valleys of death. So what it is that a lot of these tech startups, they are highly risky. So they are like high risk, high return. So we actually see that at least 90% of tech startups, usually they die before they become commercially viable. So with that kind of concept, that we know that in most of the developing country, most of the firms are small enterprises or entrepreneurs. And then they are also prone to failure. And if there is no intervention to support this group of people that high risk but prone to failure, but once it becomes successful, it actually creates a lot of jobs. And coupled with that there are so many different policy priorities in the policymakers' plate, that with the limited fiscal space that they have, that they might not devote enough attention to entrepreneurship. So here is what we think the World Bank can leverage some of its lending operations and portfolio to support certain countries that have the potential or have the willingness to grow their own tech startup ecosystem. and then also more on the subnational, on the city entrepreneurship. It's very interesting in a way that we actually see that most of these tech ecosystem, they tend to happen in what we call a first tier city, either the biggest commercial city in the country, or cities that have good university endowments. So cities like here in the US, Boston, that you have good universities around that gives enough talent or human capital to develop. So if I were to, advise, like how do you grow a tech ecosystem, I would first really consider what's the comparative advantage of this city. I think I visited Kobe a few years ago and talking to the policymakers there, and at the city level, it's like so Kobe is next to Osaka, and why like Kobe should thinking about tech ecosystem or tech startup, similar to Yokohama versus Tokyo in a sense. So we realized that at the subnational level, if there is good endowment and there is good willingness of the city government, there is actually quite a bit of cities that has enough endowment of human capital and good enough infrastructure. They're able to foster very good tech ecosystems, and especially in certain specific sectors that they traditionally is very good at. So here, like again, I think if we're to take a look at this whole type of entrepreneurial ecosystem at the subnational or city level, you will realize that certain countries and certain cities, they will dominate more on certain type of ecosystem. Especially some cities might be very good at agriculture because ecosystem. Some are very good at biotech. Some are very good at some other digital or ICT sector. And that's where I think the opportunities actually lie in that. You don't have to say, okay, Tokyo is a concentration of all the opportunities, but there are actually opportunities in other smaller cities that, as long as it's find its own edge and its own specific comparative advantage, it's doable. So here, I hope it's a good complement to Marcio's answer.
Thank you very much. Let me read the another set of question and comment that we received from the Professor Naoki Yoshino. I think Professor Yoshino is now currently in Washington, D.C., so thanks for joining us from Washington. But let me read his question and comment. First one, there will be common factors and country-specific factors to achieve sustainable growth, such as access to finance, human capital development, and total factor productivity are the common factors that apply to all countries. What else are common factors? So that's the first one. Second one is a comment. Japan seems to lack the digital business density. The main reason will be the aging population in rural areas. Among the young population and in large cities, digital business is blooming significantly. So that's the second comment. The third comment from him. Digital business requires the development of internet and broadband networks. Infrastructure investment in digital technology seems the key for developing countries. So these are the three comments and questions. If you want to make any reaction, Marcio and Juni, please come in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Yoshino, for this very interesting, thoughtful questions. Well, on the first point, I think what you are emphasizing here in terms of factors that are common across countries and factors that are more country-specific also applies to individual countries, right? Like we also have like the same country factors that are common across subnational regions or come across cities and factors that are city specific. And that I do think that is one of the key contributions that we have with this toolkit, because basically rather than propose, a kind of a standard kind of indices that you could try to compare where a given entrepreneurial ecosystem in the country or city level are compared to other places. What you do is to basically try to provide guidance on how you could make the best use of data that are available to try to understand these factors that are common. On his particular question, what are these factors that are common? I would say that from the conceptual framework, when we show, these pillars from the demand and supply side, I say that there are some components among all these factors that can be common, and some part of these components that will be variation within countries. Like, let me give an example. When I think about Kenya, we can see, and thinking about human capital, we can see that there are like some big challenges in terms of human capital that goes at the country level, but there will be a lot of variation at the city level. Like Nairobi will be very different from other parts of the country. And that is one of the reasons why in the toolkit we propose that you conduct a diagnosis at the country level and then a subnational level, is actually to try to disentangle what are factors that are common across and more specific. On the lack of digital business density, I think that goes along the point that Judy mentioned. We do see a lot of variation across cities, and we see this not only for Japan but across the world. Like, even in the US, if you think about Silicon Valley, and New York, now Austin, for example, Texas, but usually you have like a very specific places with higher comparativity on this, usually driven by human capital. And finally, on infrastructure, I fully agree, it's extremely relevant, but it's always important to emphasize this point that these other complementary factors are key to make sure that firms benefit from the infrastructure. Thank you.
Yeah, I think what I would add a bit more on the lower digital density than would have predicted by the population and GDP size of Japan. I think one of those, it's also a bit of evolution, like maybe like this 2020 data. I'm pretty sure if you look at the latest data, like 2022 or even this year, like usually we do see Japan is on an uprising scale, which is a very promising sign. One of these, it can be a different concentration, but the other is, I think it's in the younger generation that as long as they are less prone to, the ideal job is to work in a big corporation and a conglomerate for life, that kind of mentality. But now more and more that there is no taboo that I start my own startup, and even though my job as a startup owner or a business owner might be unstable, it's not a taboo in the family that I'm an entrepreneur. I think a lot of the East Asian cultures sometimes still has a way to go to on this type of entrepreneurial culture issues. So here is something that maybe also explaining the lower density. And then also a bit on the infrastructure. I do say that, okay, it's important. That's I agree. Like nobody's gonna say this is not important. But what I think it's like for a country, you don't have to wait to say, okay, I need to put in a very good broadband network until then I can develop entrepreneurial ecosystem. That is not necessarily the case. If you look at Kenya's growth trajectory over the last 10, 15 years, when it started as an entrepreneurial hub, it didn't have very good broadband. It didn't have very good internet access, but it has very good layman M-Pesa system that used like basic text messages. So it might not need the type of high-speed internet network at that stage to proliferate some of these digital solutions. So I think what's the promising sign or encouraging sign for a lot of developing countries is that if you can bring a digital solution that tailor to the local internet speed, the local culture, the local language, there is still a business case of it. And that's what we as the World Bank really do want to encourage entrepreneurs around the world, especially entrepreneurs in developing countries, to think about, what are the more cost-effective digital solutions you can bring to your own market to serve the local market, to serve the local people, to serve the local businesses that might not have the perfect infrastructure that you commonly see in developed countries. But how do you tweak it and make it into more cost-effective and more user-friendly? And this is a big market that we see is untapped, and we do see that there are a lot more that the World Bank, together with a lot of the developing country policymakers, can support. I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I know a few minutes past 9 a.m. already in Japan Standard Time, but I see Professor Shimamoto from Kyoto posted a couple of points. So let me read his point and ask Marcio and Junie to come in together with your final remarks, final messages to the audience in Japan, and we wrap up our seminar. What Professor Shimamoto says is this. Japanese market apparently is not within the 20 well-to-do the entrepreneurial ecosystem providers of the world. What are the main recommendations to be made as to Japan? And also he continued saying, can you extrapolate or elaborate more on the roles of intermediary organizations and then the problems that they face, if any? So those are the 2 points from the Professor Shimamoto. If you would want to make a comment together with your final messages, final remark to the audience in Japan before wrapping up our seminar. So Marcio, Junie, please come in. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. I think on the following also the question that regarding the Japanese market in terms of being on the top. I think there's also a perspective on the relative side in terms of the quality of these firms, right? And that I think is a very important point in a way that sometimes in many of these data sets, sometimes you do observe the dynamic of entry, number of firms growing, etc. But there's also a factor that is quite relevant, and I think Japan is doing quite well in terms of the quality of the entrepreneurship that is there. But saying that, there's always, I think, huge opportunities to continue improving this performance, particularly at the subnational level. My final message will be that we are extremely willing to collaborate, to support any government, national, subnational level, or also private institutions conduct this kind of exercise. And I hope that this publication, which is publicly available, everyone can download and go to the appendix with the instruments, could benefit from that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess my concluding remark also in response to the question is the keyword is platform ecosystem. So if you look at the biggest platform firms in the world, it seems it's not coming from Japan, even though Japan was very technology advanced, like holds the key of a lot of patents from semiconductor to robotics, etc. Like, one of my key questions is why there is no big platforms coming out of the Japanese market, given, like, I wouldn't suggest or recommend to say something, okay, you need good access to finance. You have SoftBank and a lot of these big conglomerates. You have very good infrastructure. You have very good universities, etc. So the key question is like why there is no such a platform economy or platform ecosystem that originate from Japan. This is a big, I would say a question mark from my head. And I do see that a lot of the times policymakers might focus very deep on supporting certain technologies, certain R&D process, but not necessarily business model innovation or thinking about how to facilitate the industries to cross-collaborate and cross-pollinate to make sure this kind of platform ecosystem can survive. And I know that there is definitely e-commerce, etc., but somehow it just never crossed the border to reach a certain scale. So here is my keyword, like what it takes for Japan to have its own platform ecosystem that dominate the world. And perhaps that's where our next seminar can be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Connecting us from Washington, we had Marcio Cruz, who is a principal economist in the Economic Research Unit of the International Finance Corporations. And we also had the Juni Zhu, who is a senior economist in the Market Competitiveness and Technologies Global Unit of the World Bank, both discussing the latest publication, Developing Entrepreneurial Ecosystems for Digital Businesses and Beyond, Diagnostic Toolkit. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us today. Great. Thank you very much. So this concludes the morning seminars in 2023. Thank you very much for watching. We organized actually total 26 morning seminars in 2023. And this definitely we would continue doing this next year. In 2023, we observed the easing of the restrictions. We had more World Bank visitors visiting Tokyo. But on the other hand, I think, not necessarily the case that we could organize these seminars featuring new publications in a face-to-face manner always. So definitely we would want to continue doing this practice in 2024. We organize interesting seminars virtually. So please stay tuned. Check our website for the latest information. Have a nice year. See you in the January 2024. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Koichi. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.